Hey, this is Michael Lindsay from Vital MX. I'm here to give you guys our first look at the 2022 KTM 450 SXF Factory Edition. Some people call these 2022.5s, and really it's kind of a forward look at what's going to become the 2023 model. Per usual, KTM every 3 to 4 years when they drop a factory edition, it's actually an all-new motorcycle, gives them the opportunity to take it to A1 and race it. They'll have enough of these units in the States by the required dates in the rule book, so they can race basically this all-new motorcycle. In terms of newness to the bike, I would say for both the 450 and the 250, which we have another video on, this is the biggest single change KTM's made in probably 2 generations. And we'll get into a few of those reasons why it's a little bit of a departure for them on a few items. So like I said, looking at, of course, all new plastic, all new bodywork, starting from the basics there. The guys are telling us, hey, we really went back to the drawing board and just worked on contact points. So a lot of your radiator shroud fading into your side plates are all about how you grip and feel the bike. They've actually gone to symmetrical side plates, meaning your left side plate, even though there isn't an exhaust under it, it is tapered out a little bit to the same amount that the exhaust side is. So as you're sliding back on the bike, you feel those contact points into the back of your legs in the same place on each side of the bike, and you have the same amount of control. The foot pegs are wider, they're tapered up a little bit to kind of keep you, once again, legs at a wider standpoint, allow you to have more leverage when you pinch in your knees and have this better contact on the side of the bike on the new airbox side plate into the front of the radiator shroud where we mostly contact the motorcycle. The seat profile has also been redone for these same exact reasons. The radiator shrouds, everybody's commenting about, oh, they're really long and pointy. There's a reason. They said they wanted to get these things out in front of the radiators and pointed in enough you wouldn't be able to basically get your boots into them. But they're also, of course, trying to keep up things like airflow through the radiator. This is the design they came up with. They were happy with, between aesthetics and feel. The top of the radiator shroud actually has a textured area on it. So if you're somebody, you're in a deep rut, you got your leg up high, the boot actually kind of has a place to grip on the top of the radiator shroud and help you keep your leg up. Also talking about the plastics, front fender, very unique. It's got these little winglets on the back side, basically where the rear of the front fender comes back past the forks. It's meant to reduce the amount of dirt and roost and rocks coming off the front tire that gets up to you as the rider. The type of roost that can come off the front tire and actually go, because it's coming upwards, can go into your helmet, your goggles. Just kind of a little thing they came up with that they're giving kind of experimental shot on this bike that they seem to be pretty stoked on. Moving from just, like I said, the little basic aesthetics there, the chassis is probably the biggest overall change KTM's done in quite a while. Still a chromoly chassis, of course, chromoly steel, but they've really changed, being that they're the only of the major OEMs that still is a single backbone frame that then splits into spars and the foot pegs. It's not a twin spar like most of your aluminum Japanese bikes. Typically, from the head stay back, it's a single tube all the way to the shock tower, and then you have right in front of that the 2 spars that go down to the footrest. By having the head tube and the whole backbone of the frame attached to the shock tower, all the force that's applied into the shock can be sent through the frame all the way to the head stay, and vice versa. Impacts and energy transferred from the front end, from the front tire and contacting into obstacles, holes and all that, that energy goes up the front fork, through the head stay, and all the way down the backbone to the shock point. So energy on both sides of the bike is affecting areas of the frame they weren't happy with. So they've gone to a new shock tower that is much more similar to what you see on a twin spar motorcycle. Once again, like the Japanese frames, you see the aluminum ones that are a spar, 2 spars coming off the steering tube that wrap all the way back and down to the foot pegs. There is no center spar for that shock tower. So when you get back to where it curves down to go to the foot pegs, there's usually this bridge that goes across from each spar that has the shock tower on it. KTM has now adopted this into their single backbone style frame, and what that allows is all that energy coming out of shock goes up into the shock tower, and all it does is kind of pull up on the frame. It doesn't send energy out to the front of the frame near as much as it used to. So for them, it's been able to isolate how energy is transferred through the frame, which for them, they said, it's been a big deal. I know that KTM, there's been comments and rumors that on their race frames the last couple of years, Other than the big gusset we all see in the front of the frame in a lot of Spivos or up close at the Supercrosses, that big cross member they were running in the front cradle, there was rumors that they were actually gusseting the shock tower to try to stiffen that area of the frame because of the energy and how much it was flexing there through that single backbone. So I would say, it's a difference in theory, but it's also really cool because, like I said, it's not only what probably production R&D has talked about, it's what the race team has given them for information, like, hey, we're struggling with this. So it's kind of a big shift for KTM in terms of how they design their frames. With this, they have a new swing arm. Basically, the packaging of the linkage, where it attached to the swing arm, where this shock is to the new shock tower is all very different. So the swing arm has been adapted for that. The swing arm itself is a little bit more rigid, a little bit more precise feeling. But at the same time, they've also dropped the rear axle size from 25 millimeter to 22 millimeter to try to get back a little bit of comfort where the wheel's contacting initially, a little bit of flex there. They were looking once again for probably a certain amount of precision from the swing arm, not twisting in certain loads, but to make it not feel too stiff or rigid, they've given up a little bit at the axle to try to maintain the balance they're looking for. The engine itself has also gotten biggest overall. The engine itself has gone the biggest overhaul they've given it in quite a while. The actual power plant hasn't really changed for reasons of, they're trying to, really change the engine character or anything. It's all about packaging. Pretty impressive if they've taken the 450 cases and front to rear, they've shrunk it by over an inch. I think it's 25 millimeters. So they've had to really work on where the oil galleys are, how the transmission is stacked under the clutch, where the clutch placement is, how close is the cylinder. And this has allowed them to shrink the overall engine and be able to tilt it back in the frame a little bit, trying to go for, as a lot of people hear as an engineering term or PR term in these bikes, is better mass centralization. They're trying to put the weight in a very specific place of the bike. Also with the 450, they've changed the cylinder head again and the valve cover. They've just tried to lower it more, take more weight out of it, drop the valve cover, drop the cam down, try to get lower in the bike and bring down all that mass. Now, another reason they've done this big change with the engine is KTM has had, for the past couple generations, a frame for the 250 and 350 motor because they basically share cases. And then the 450 has had its own frame for the cradle area because the 450 engine mounted a lot different. As we've seen with this factory edition 250 and 350, they are now using the same frame. The 250 also got an overhaul in the engine, and what they've done is they can mount, these engines now mount the exact same way. They have the exact same position for all their mounting points in the cradle, in the front of the frame. The engine mount points can come down. They are a little different from 450, 250, but where they mount to the frame is the same. And then also it leaves the countershaft sprocket for all three of these motors in the same exact position, so they have the same amount of anti-squat and how the chain character is over the swing arm, etc. This is pretty impressive because this now means they will use one frame for 250, 350, and 450 going forward. And a rumor we've heard too is when we see the next batch of production bikes come out, I believe you'll see an update to the two-stroke engines to do the exact same thing. So there will be a one shared frame across all those platforms instead of having to tweak all the cradles to fit different engines. Other than that, with the 450, everything they told us haven't really sounded like they've tried to change much of the engine character in terms of what they've done with the head or the porting or anything like that. They have updated the piston. They bumped up the compression. I think it was 12.7 to 1 before. Now we're at 13.1 to 1. So overall, a little bit of bump compression, a little bit of bump and power, but no really specific goals they've given us on what they're trying to accomplish. If it really changed much of the character, just gave it overall a little bit of bump. Electronics, big update, quick shifter. If you come from the road world, you've probably heard that term many a times. Basically, if you're going down a straightaway, throttle's wide open. Instead of having to chop the throttle, touch the clutch lever, or anything like that, you just reach down and pull up on the shifter. It has a strain gauge inside of it that senses that load that you're putting on the shift lever, and for a split second, it will cut ignition to the bike to free up the load on the motor and pull an upshift. So say you're just coming off like some jump onto a big main straightaway, you're going to go from second to third to fourth. You just hold the throttle all the way wide open and just start rowing it through the gears, and you'll feel a little momentary clip on the power, so you don't have to chop the throttle or reach for the clutch lever. Thought this was kind of unique because yes, it's common in road applications. Dirt bikes, yes, in theory it can be useful, but it's very interesting to see them go for a dirt. Definitely quick shifter technology has come a long ways, because us bouncing around the bikes, I would initially be worried that, oh, you could bump the shifter. But I've heard like the strain gauges and the way they measure the force against the shifter has improved drastically over the years they've had on street models. And clearly they wouldn't bring this out on dirt if they hadn't well tested it. So neat little feature in there. You can turn it on off by a little simple button on the handlebar, which also that same cluster has the traction control switch on off that KTM has had for a while, which their term of traction control is it's just a crankbase sensor that looks for RPM spikes under a certain throttle opening. It actually has nothing to do with wheel sensors whatsoever. Especially because on dirt bikes, the front and rear wheel are almost never traveling the same speed. Doesn't really work based on that theory. You still have the options of map 1, map 2, map 1 being calmer, map 2 being more aggressive. They did mention this. They've put a lot of effort into making those maps feel a lot different. We've run into sometimes where OEMs, they'll have 2 or 3 map options, and it's hard to tell the difference. You're clicking them on the track, and you're like, this is a little bit sharper throttle response here, a little smoother there, but it's not like, wow, that was different. Where if you work with like an engine guy and you get to try an aftermarket ECU that has a few custom maps built in it, each one of them can feel drastically different. KTM said that's a goal they're trying with this map 1.2 is to make a much more clear cut for the consumer of like, hey, map 1's really the mellow one. This is the easy to ride. Map 2 is going to be really aggressive. It's going to be really sharp throttle response. They want to just add a little bit more differentiation in there for the consumer. They've updated the shock. They've actually shortened it, but that does not mean they've lost travel. It's still 300 millimeters of travel. They've just managed to redesign the shock body, the clevis, to shrink the mounting points by I think like 15 millimeters, which has a lot to do with that new shock tower, the linkage, the swing arm, and the packaging they needed to get the shock repositioned and moved how they wanted to once again, mass centralization, work with how they want to rotate the engine, probably where their throttle body is now, just all those things added together. The shock also does see some updates, new piston design with basically you'll have like a big hole, small hole, big hole, small hole as it rotates around the piston. And the idea is it actually lifts the shim in a wave character instead of just snapping it open. They say that improves the way the shim pops open initially. They said the character has been, the feel of it's been improved on track for comfort. They're still on 48 millimeter Zact Air AER technology forks, basically the same fork they've had for multiple years now. A couple of updates to the settings for this bike, but nothing really drastically different on the fork side of things. Of course, the bike, for this being the FE, has the whole factory edition look, Red Bull KTM graphics, the split triple clamp design on it, which is part of their power parts catalog, has a 20 and 22 millimeter option that's adjustable. You spin the stem at the base, you can pop it out and spin it. Polyamide composite skid plates, front brake disc guards, does have a mechanical hole shot device that comes on its standard, factory Sella de Valle grip cover with ribs on it, just kind of the usual little goodies that make this bike stand out a little bit more. But like I said, honestly, we're coming at the end of the day is KTM has tried to, like I said, improve the mass on the bike to improve how light it feels with the engine. They've also done some updates to the transmission, the clutch on the 450 engine, just to make it more durable, to improve the feel. The chassis, they've worked really hard to try to work on basically bump absorption. Because of that shock tower difference, you don't have energy from one end of the bike affecting the other. Keeps the bike more balanced. It basically isn't affected as heavily by the terrain that you're encountering. Beyond that, they have tried not to really affect any other flex on the bike. They want to keep, the character they kind of had from their last frame for overall handling. They just want to improve that bump absorption and how the energy is transferred throughout the motorcycle. Another really unique one is the subframe. This bike has a aluminum subframe with polyamide kind of molded around it, basically like a sort of a carbon composite looking material. So they've gone aluminum for the actual mounting points to the frame for strength, but the polyamide, more the rear section of the subframe, is supposed to be a little bit more flex and give. I think in the intro presentation, they said something like this subframe will take up to 6 to 7 inches of flexion and snap back to its original character. The polyamide more towards the rear helps with that. Aluminum doesn't have as much memory at times, so combining the two materials, they got the sturdiness of the aluminum being the mounting point, but a little bit more of the memory and forgiveness of having the polyamide at the rear, for the rear of the subframe, kind of the battery box and all that. Also, the way they've designed is they've kind of made a grab hole on both sides of the bike for you to lift the bike on the stand, which also acts as your airbox inlet. But in like, a lot of bikes you could try to reach in on the airbox, but it's usually a piece of plastic, like side plate plastic. This is a real hard composite material to lift up on. The bike overall has very minorly changed in weight. There are items that are lighter, but there's a few things that have gone stouter, heavier on the bike. That wasn't really the goal. They are already the lightest in class. Just more about improving the overall generation of motorcycle for them, taking what they had and just trying to improve on every little aspect. A little bit more power, a little bit more comfort, a little bit better suspension character. And then, like I said, talking to them, big focus was on rider feel on the bike, the contact points, the actual connection between the rider and the motorcycle itself. Like I mentioned partially in this video, there's also a brand new 250 SXF factory edition. We did a separate video on that. Make sure you hit the link down below to check that out, or the little bit bubble floating at the top of this video right now. Like I said, we'll see this bike at A1. Team will be racing it. They will be in dealers probably late January, maybe early February. Typical KTM is only doing a run of 400 of these. A couple will go to Canada, some to the team, so even less than that will actually be at dealerships if you want to check one out. And as usual, this should be a prelude to what we will see for the 23 production model, probably with a few more tweaks, maybe a little less goodies on the motorcycle overall. If you enjoy all this tech info, a little bit of the deep dive, give us a like, subscribe, let us know in the comment section if you have any more questions about this motorcycle, and thanks for watching.